Assalamu alaikum. This is your host Warisa Zaina with another episode of Agahi. Today, I have invited someone really special who is based in Canada but does a lot of healing work around the globe. She is a very spiritual person who has authored 12 books on various subjects related to psychological well-being, spirituality, and consciousness. She does a lot of healing work and is a spiritualist and a shaman. And we will explore further about the work that she does in helping people connect with their inner self and getting over physical and emotional pain through spirituality. Premasudha Janet Hobbs, thank you so much for joining us today and a big warm welcome to our game.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. Very
Absolute
excited.
honor. So I have so much to talk to you about, and you've authored 12 books, and even if you could just pick one book and talk about that, that would take several hours. So I'm just gonna request you to kind of first explain about the nature of the work that you do and how it helps people in finding healing when they're going through difficult periods in their life.
Well, of course, this is difficult to put into words in a way, but if you think of, say, an Aboriginal culture and the reverence for nature and the simplicity of their lifestyle, and then think of a highly complex, 21st century culture, this work marries the two so that we can function very simply and in truth, like the Aboriginals, and at the same time function in this much more complex intellectual way that our cultures are entertaining at this time.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a leap because most of us leave the simple Aboriginal aspects of our humanity behind.
Right.
Yes. And this is, again, part of why there's this great unhappiness and mental instability, because it's like trying to leave the mammal behind and just function from the intellect. And this won't work. We're mammals. So we're very bright mammals, but
Spiritual
mammals.
beings.
Yes. Yes. And our bodies contain, in my experience, they contain cells of our bodies carry our divine nature, and at the same time, our cells also carry our imprinting and our emotional complexes, our fears, even tension. That we talk a lot about tension, but it's not really understood that our tension is actually, it's a form of fear. It's fear in our bodies. It's fear of our true nature, and it expresses as tension. So this work will strengthen our connection to truth in ourselves, and it will weaken or starve the ego and the complexes. And these complexes often, when they're coming up to clear, they often make themselves known through pain. We feel like we've got a sore tummy, or our shoulders hurt.
Yes.
Or we have a headache.
Yes. Talking about headaches, Premasudha, you mentioned that headaches can be the result of emotional conflict. And sometimes, often, what we are going through in life takes the form of physical ailment or mental ailment. But the root cause is quite in depth in the sense that it's in your unconscious self, maybe, or in your subconscious, and you may not be aware of what's causing
That's
it.
it. That's it. The the emotional conflict that causes a headache, it might be the root of it might be in something that happened to you when you were 4 years old, where suddenly maybe something happened in your family, or at preschool, and you got shocked a bit and you lost some trust. So when a situation comes up in your adulthood where you have an opportunity to recover that trust, to move back into more trust, you might get a headache because there's sort of like, well, which am I going to stand with, the fear or the trust? And sometimes when our crown chakra is opening into more trust of the divine and trust that God truly exists and truly loves us,
Mm.
we might get a headache because we're a little bit, we're not quite sure whether that's really true or not. We
Wow.
might say our prayers and everything, but when push comes to shove, we might feel sometimes not loved by the creator. So we get a headache. I got lots of headaches as I was clearing my connection to truth, lots of them.
Wow. That seems to be quite relevant for people, especially who are experiencing something on a very like quite a deep level, and they may not be conscious of why they are feeling in a certain way, what triggers certain emotions. So how can you be aware of the things that lie within our unconsciousness or subconsciousness? How can we be aware? How can we
This is
connect?
it. Yeah, this is it. This is, seems to me, the human race's learning curve. We're all having to go more inside, and some cultures are more inner focused than others already. And the more we're in a like extroverted materialist focus, like in North America, the more
Mhm.
challenging it is to learn how to turn inward. Okay, I remember a teacher of mine saying to me, Premasudha, you have to genuflect to the mystery. You have to, bow down to the fact that you don't know, that you can't figure everything out with your little head. Um, you know, the more the more devoted you are to the inner search, the more you pay attention and put it first in your life, the more detailed the information from inside will become. So, if you're really, really focused on it, um, you you can also get a sense of what the issue is that's clearing, and you know what happened early that caused you upset. The other thing is to make it simple for people. I through meditation, I came up with this. Well, it I didn't come up with it. It came through me. Okay,
Mhm.
it already existed. But this body approach, where you just look at your location of the pain, and
Right.
you you see it as a metaphor for the psychological reason for it. So,
Mm.
if something's in your heart area, it's going to be related to love and receiving love. If something's in your shoulders, it's going to be related to taking responsibility. You know, our necks, like how freely can we turn our neck, right to left? How broad is our perspective? Maybe in childhood, maybe we grew up with two very narrow parents, maybe. And so
Mm.
maybe, I mean, really, our neck might not be able to turn, really. I
Wow.
was working with a woman who was 86, and
Mhm.
she made an emotional shift, and suddenly her neck released, and she went,
Wow.
oh, I can move my neck. But what happened was her mind opened and her perspective broadened. I mean, it's so simple, this work, that I think that's part of why it gets overlooked.
And was it
It's
through
so staring
meditation?
us in the face. Pardon?
Was it through meditation?
That she made this shift. In this case, no. What happened was, um, I was very focused on helping her accept herself.
Right.
And she suddenly shifted. into more self-acceptance and feeling loved. She felt safe and loved by me. So she shifted into more self-acceptance. And so then her perspective, increased, broadened. It became more like the owl, who the
Yeah.
wise old owl who can move its neck,
Yeah.
360 degrees.
Yeah. Yeah. You also mentioned that self-realization through embracing oneself is quite a powerful tool in this journey.
Right,
And you mentioned just now about acceptance. Um,
right,
that also
right.
helps in shifting your focus and your mindset.
You know, if you think that we're all God's children and any parent knows how much they love their children, well, how much more does God love us?
Mhm.
But we might not feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I I feel there's lots of reasons why we might not feel this. You know, in ancient times, children were carried by their mom, on the mom's body
Mm.
and even in simpler cultures, this still happens for a long time, like maybe 2 years, as she does her tasks. And there are other women around, and the child gets, a lot of touch and a lot of love very early.
Mm.
Now, we don't do this anymore, but our I feel really strongly that our bodies and psyches are really, there's thousands and thousands of years of that pattern.
Wow.
And so we're ignoring these patterns. And in the West, we will, you know, a woman, 30% of the women give birth through cesareans. So
Mm.
the mom, right at the time that's the most crucial for the baby to feel loved and to bond with the mom, the mom has this terrible wound, which if she were on the battlefield, she would just die. It's a mortal wound.
Yeah.
But she to bond with the baby over this and maybe, go back to work in 3 months. And it's it it creates, what we're doing creates psychologically the patterns of alienation,
Mm.
of not getting the love that we're primed to get, not to feel it. We may be really loved as a baby, but
Yeah.
we might not feel it. So then we go into adulthood, we don't feel it. It's, where is it? And it makes it hard for us to accept ourselves. You
So
see,
this goes back into childhood, feeling like
goes
this in
back
your
to
adulthood.
childhood.
You also mentioned in your
Yeah,
book that
goes back
children
to
who are
childhood.
not loved are left with no idea how to care deeply for themselves, and they learn to exploit,
Right,
manipulate, and
right.
suffer from insecurity. How does that
Yeah.
happen?
Well, it's, you know, the two polarities in the universe are love and fear. So where love is not, fear will rush in. So when,
Right.
we have these children that for thousands of years are primed to be held and carried for maybe even 2 full years. When that doesn't happen,
Mm.
then there's an insecurity that comes in, and with that comes in, like, if there's insecurity and fear, then the child pulls back, goes up into their heads, and tries to figure out how to get what they need or want. And there's manipulation. It's sort of like stepping back, trying to
Mm.
figure out how to work with the circumstances to get
Right.
your needs met. Right,
Mm.
right, right. This is how insidious it is. I remember a channel saying to me, you know, you have asked the same question for over 3 years.
Wow.
And my question, and it said the question is, and you've asked it in many ways, what behaviors of yours will give your sons the feeling of being loved? And what behaviors of mine will help turn them into, fine human beings? And the channel's point was, well, what would the thing that my sons needed most to become fine human beings was for me to become a fine human being, for me to express this inner nobility that we all have. But I wasn't doing that. I was stepping back and trying to figure out how to manipulate this circumstance. Do you see that in so many of our parenting books? No, in North America, it's all how to manipulate your children.
Because children imitate their parents. So the parents have to be the perfect role models so that they can expect the same behavior from their children.
But the parent could learn how to love and forgive themselves,
Yeah.
to accept their humanity, and then their children would be able to accept their own flaws and humanity. It's good to be vigilant and try to become, as perfect as possible. But if you're doing that too much,
Yeah.
you will really hurt yourself, and you will become, you'll end up becoming the flawed person that you were scared you were going to become. Yeah.
So this is quite similar to what we hear in today's modern world about attachment theory, that it all goes back into your childhood, how you were raised, what your relationship with your parents or your caregivers was like, and that is going to form and shape your personality in adulthood.
Okay.
I also wanted to ask you to kind of elaborate on the point that you mentioned again in one of your books, that mental breakdown or mental breakthroughs. This is like a spiritual event in one's life, and whether this is understood by someone or not, it has a deep impact on your state of mind and your subconsciousness.
I just want to go back to what you were saying about what I was saying about the attachment theory.
Mm,
Yes and no. It's like if you have a parent who is really lodged in truth,
yeah.
then it doesn't matter what that parent really does, you
Hmm.
will be a really healthy and unusual child. Do you see what I mean? It's the degree that the parent is lodged in truth, and is honest and lets the love flow that matters the most. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Um, about, yes, mental illness.
Mm,
Okay, in India,
yeah.
I've heard that when there's mental distress,
Hmm.
it's considered uh, a spiritual acceleration. It's considered good news and is considered temporary.
Okay.
Whereas, in the West, we have a tendency to freeze a person in that period. So, if you're going through a psychological difficulty, you might get a diagnosis and
Mm,
pills, which is good, but not if it just freezes you there
yeah.
so that you stay forever sort of caught in between the two worlds of who you were conditioned to become, and then the other side of the mental illness is being who you were born to be. I mean, this is what happened to me. I was raised in a very, very rigid, very upwardly mobile, success-oriented family. And
Mm.
in my 30s, I had a bad nervous breakdown. And to heal from it, I had to let go of the Premasudha I had been and
Mm.
and become this person that I am. And this, I would say, was more the person I was born to be. Now, one of the things that once a nervous breakdown has happened,
Yeah.
it is a bit violent. I see it as that we so don't know how to speak with the divine or flow with the divine, that the divine has to take a hammer kind of and bash in the door to open us. You see? So there's a violence to this. So one of the things that I noticed was after the nervous breakdown, um, and as I grew and developed, if I got caught in my ego again, what would happen is these nervous breakdown symptoms would return. It
Right.
was like scar tissue. Yeah, it would return.
Mm.
Now, this was upsetting, but at the same time, it was very useful because as soon as these symptoms returned, I realized I was caught in my ego, and I would uh, increase my efforts to connect to truth and open up to listen to what the divine was trying to explain to me. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Mm. And I think nobody talks about this. I,
Yeah.
I I have never heard it from anywhere other from just from me. Yeah.
I guess this is more like a wake-up call, especially when, for example, you're making the same mistakes in life and you're repeating the same patterns and you're not really getting anywhere. And sometimes you learn the most important lessons in life the hardest way. So I think it's quite similar to what you're saying about having a mental breakthrough or a mental breakdown and how it impacts your level of spirituality and spiritual health.
Yeah, I mean, I, if you can, if a person can find a teacher to help them open in a gentle way, it's much faster that way than, going through the trauma. When I look at my life,
Mm.
it slowed me down. It was like so much scar tissue I had to deal with, and
Yeah.
yeah. Mhm. There are two ways of evolution. There's the male way, which is, the males are, they have to be because they were in the old days, they would provide for the family. So there's more of a conditional structure for the male. The male has to get up, say in Canada, during the early settling, they would have to get up and go hunting for food. Okay. So, but the feminine way, it's more this um, unconditional love, just loving a child into behaving better. I, you know, it's in the male way, it's like cutting out the disease, and the female way is to love out the disease. So I've sort of lost my train of thought why I started talking about this. Just about, different ways of evolving. I think we're too rough with ourselves sometimes. We slow ourselves down because
Mhm.
we're not forgiving enough of ourselves and patient.
So self-compassion is absolutely
Oh,
necessary for healing and for growth.
if we can think of God as like our loving, more loving than a parent. So,
Yeah.
if we catch ourselves making the same mistake again, we
Mm.
can go to God and say, oh, God, here I have, I've done it again. You know what I'm like. You know how hard this is for
Yeah.
me. Please help me. Rather than like hitting ourselves over the head for like 2 weeks, feeling
Yeah.
bad about ourselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, my next question to you is how can we reach that status of consciousness where we are kind of aware of what's happening deep down? How can we manage, the intrapsychic conflict that we have within our minds and resolve that before it takes the form of a mental illness or a psychological difficulty in later life? How can we prevent it from happening?
Well, I'd say as soon as you start trying to prevent it, you're actually going to set it in motion. Okay. You know, it's like that thing, don't think about a white elephant, right? So immediately
Mm,
you, you end up thinking about a white elephant, right?
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I think it's if we realize that the more that you just want to embody your true nature more than anything else, that you just look around and you go, the human race is just going to have more and more trouble if we keep doing what we're doing. So please, universe, creator, show me how to embody my truth and really mean it. This
Mm,
is the key. Like when I look back at my journey,
yeah.
I was so ignorant. But when I said I want to move into truth, I really meant it. I really meant it. And if your will is behind it, the universe or the creator will respond with the same kind of care
Mm,
and devotion that you're giving the creator. Do you understand?
yeah, yeah.
Mm. And in my experience, you know, the 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 male aspect of humanity, the male polarity is so it's respected, and sometimes the qualities of the feminine polarity are
Mm,
considered weak. And so for women, it can make it really hard for us to love ourselves, Marissa. This sometimes women are really laboring under this,
mm,
that, you know, that they're not okay. And the thing is, we need clear, loving, feminine energy more than anything in both men and women. Well, my great hope is that the women of the world, that they just realize how valuable they are
mm,
and how much we need the softness and the cooperation and the nurturing and the patience and the compassion of the female polarity in you know in humanity. And males all have a feminine side too. Mm.
right. You said that waking up is something which is quite hard to do for most of us. I think to remain in our comfort zone is quite
Yeah,
easy instead of coming out of the comfort zone, bringing change within ourselves, and then changing and shifting everything around us. It's a lot of work
it's a lot of work.
and it can be a painful process as
Can be
well. It's
very
hurtful.
painful.
Yeah.
It can be very painful, but
How can you make it easy? How can you make it a possibility? I think you need another hour just to explain that, right?
there's it's funny, I just posted a video, and it was about how to heal our anger, and that if
Mm,
our anger is unconscious, we walk around feeling separate from everything,
yeah.
and including ourselves, mother nature, and others. And if we allow this anger to heal, we start connecting up with ourselves and all of nature and everybody. But to heal the anger, we have to be able to experience the deep grief of feeling separate. But the simplest way to heal anger really is to cry for God, to yearn so much to embody our true nature that
Mm,
tears fall. And this
yeah.
will this will actually heal our inner anger. But in my experience, the journey it's bigger than we realize. It's sort of like, if I'd known
Yeah.
what my journey was going to take me. I mean, I don't know if I would have followed through, but I'm very grateful that I followed through. But it was far more challenging than I had expected. But the thing is, the results are good.
Mm.
So we get what we give. If you have this fortitude and and the steadiness to keep at it, the great gifts of your life will just open up into ways that there are no words for how what it feels like to really feel that God exists, and that when you pray that God is responding.
Yeah.
It's just, and so it's worth it. We're divine beings. We think we're human, but we're divine. So
Yeah.
the more we remember that and
Mm.
and make that our center of gravity, and seek to embody the qualities of our divinity, seek to allow them in. I'm not talking about trying to be good. I'm talking about really allowing our true nature to shine through.
Mm.
The more good we do here. But life, what can I say? It takes everything you've got and then some.
You've spent a really long time in getting to where you are now. How many years have you spent in learning, in acquiring, knowledge from teachers and masters? You've traveled so much, spent a lot of time in many countries, and your own personal journey, your personal
Okay,
experiences that led
in
to.
yeah, in my 20s, when I was really unhappy and I didn't know why. And in the East, they would say that was really good, because they'd say that such a person gets onto their spiritual journey sooner than later if they're deeply unhappy. But I remember going to channels, and they would say to me, the amount of emotional garbage I had to deal with, they had never seen such a big pile.
Wow. And this is when you
So
were working as a journalist.
yes, this is when, and I felt great unhappiness, and I just didn't know why.
Mm.
Um, and so when I began the journey and started studying with teachers, the truth of this comment that I had an unusual amount of resistance was very obvious. So it's taken me 30 years. I mean, what could I
Wow,
say?
that is a long
30,
time.
maybe even 34 years.
Mm.
Yeah.
Talk us
I
through
mean,
your own experience, Premasudha, because you went through something and that could have been like a wake up call for you. And the journey that you took from that moment onwards transformed you completely. And
it
you're
did.
definitely not the same person as you were, say,
No.
35 years ago, or 40 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
What happened?
My son was diagnosed with leukemia, and
Hmm.
they said there was no chance of a healing.
Right.
No chance that there was no therapy they could even do, because it was a bizarre kind of leukemia. So,
Mm.
and this is years and years ago, nearly 40 years ago. So,
Right.
who knows? They probably could do something now. But I remember coming back from the appointment, and I put my son down on the carpet,
Mm.
and the sun came in behind him, and I had this moment of, it was like heaven and earth meeting.
Wow.
And it was that, if I knew that, if I believed the doctors, I mean, I did believe them in a way, but if I gave up on my son's life,
Yeah.
that he would feel it in my breast milk. So
Mm.
I and die. And so I opened the door, and it was an experiential moment. It was almost outside time and space. I opened the door for something else to happen.
Mm.
And what happened is, within 2 weeks of that decision, somebody put me in touch with Olga Worrell, who sent love every day from a distance for about 3 years. And my son healed completely. His blood count was 60,000. He was so pale, you could almost see through his skin. I mean, he was dying. Uh-huh. And he had a complete healing, and he's now a grown man, and he's got a very deep quality. So, okay, now after that, that was pivotal, because I had a direct experience of my prayer being answered and of God's love coming through. My difficulty was actually learning to love myself.
Wow.
That's why I had such a difficult time, you see, just like what you're talking about in between. Because on one hand, that was just, I mean, a sterling example of God existing, but it was for me to really feel that I deserved love and that God was there for me too, not for my son. And that took me 2 or 3 years of just the most intense psychological pain. But I did it because I'll tell you, God wins. You know, that's the thing in the fight between the ego and God, God wins. So,
of course.
Yeah.
So how can we make our ego lose in this war?
Yeah. Okay. So I'd say that question, you know, you're sort of standing away from yourself, and you're going, okay, what action should I take? Or how do I, you know, manipulate my ego into dying? It's like, yeah, it's, you know, that will actually, you know, a lot of the West is doing this, and actually that will make things worse. That will actually make your ego get bigger, because whatever you fight will get bigger.
Really?
Right? Yeah. It's like the story of the white knight who goes and he wants to rid the country of all the evil black knights. So he sets off, and 20 years later, he looks in a lake and he sees his reflection, and he's become a black knight because he focused on the black and fought it. It's like, if you want grace and light, you focus on grace and light. It's whatever you put your attention to, you will get more of. So, you know, Rissa, let me just think for a minute. Yeah, you're very lovable. I mean, you're very lovable. I mean, just accept it. you're you're very lovable and very adorable, and you have this heart of gold. It's like, you know, now the world knows it. So maybe you can, you know, give yourself the benefit of the doubt, side with yourself. Like, you're beautiful just the way you are. You're about as perfect as a human being can be, with, you know, just, you know, aware of your human flaws, and wanting to serve humanity, and wanting to embody more of your true nature. And that will get you where you need to go. It'll be like an IV. Think of an IV coming into your, the more you focus on love and grace, the more love and grace is coming into you and softening you with yourself, to yourself. You see, most of us don't realize, you know, we're adults, and when we try to figure ourselves out, we don't realize that we're actually walking around in our injured child energy, that our wanting to fix our ego is coming from our injured child. It is actually coming from the ego. The soul would never come through that way. It's your soul knows why your ego is there, and out of the sorrow that it formed, and your soul has just enormous compassion for your struggles with the ego, or for any of our struggles with the ego. So think that way. Your divine nature is already in your cells.
How can people come to that realization?
You have to really want to. You have to really want it more than anything else. You know?
And is it necessary to find a purpose in life for that?
Well, as you find it, the byproduct of finding it will be you find more of a purpose, because your true nature
Mhm.
has maybe goals for you this life. Like, this is, I'm doing what my true nature wanted me to do. My ego self was like a neurotic journalist, you know.
Yeah.
But Marissa, I mean, okay, how about this? Would you be willing to make a shift into more truth just through doing the Zoom? Yes or no?
When you say shift, as in mindset or outlook or beliefs,
Would you be willing for your God self to be more strengthened in the cells of your body than before you began the Zoom?
definitely.
Okay, so it is. That's it. That's how simple it is. And after after we close and everything, I would say, 99.9% that you will see the result of you having made this, said yes in the
Mm.
Zoom, and that your sense of trust will have been strengthened. It's like that. Also, you can imagine angels hugging you. Just, whatever keeps your mind connected to your divine nature and not thinking, just the thoughts about how loud our neighbor is, or, our hard time at work or
Yeah.
traffic, or, okay. So one of the things that happened to me on the journey was, out of the sort of deep depression and
Mm.
um, difficulty, uh, this knowledge surfaced from inside my body. I don't know how to explain it apart from that. It wasn't like an intellectual thing. It surfaced from the cells of my body, and also from, I noticed from my observation of my aches and pains, and then connecting them to what I was going through. So I came to this understanding that the body is like a physical metaphor for our souls, and that the parts of our bodies that we have difficulty in, there's meaning, and it's actually pointing to our issue, our psychological issue. So if you don't know what your issues are, you can just look at your body and feel your aches and pains, and or feel where the illness is, and that will tell you what issues you're working on. So for example, in the West, okay, knees. So knees are relationship, and and I used to kneel to pray,
Mm.
and the suitor would get down on his knees to ask his fiancée to marry him. It's the knees have to do with relationship, and so relationship with ourselves and with others, so, and with our bodies. So in the West, you know there's a lot of trouble with knee pain, and especially from,
Arthritis.
yeah, and also, runner's knee, from all the, the young people who used, my generation, they're not young anymore, but they would run uh, on cement, you know, endlessly. And, a big badge of honor is to be fit. And people would run, and maybe they didn't listen to their bodies, and ran no matter how they were feeling. And they would then get trouble with their knees finally, because they weren't listening. Now, I know this is hard on one hand for our minds to get around, that the meanings of our illnesses and aches and pains are directly related to the complexes we are working on. But to me, it's just become really obvious in my own experience. I actually had breast cancer a couple of
Okay.
years ago, and I knew it was related to some misunderstandings I had around the feminine. It was my left breast, so it was on the left side of my body. It was the left side is in the shamanic viewpoint is the feminine side of the body. It was right in the milk duct, right in the milk of human kindness. And I really knew from my inner experience of myself that little bit of bitterness within me around loving, kind of bitterness. Oh, feeling like, oh, it never comes back to me the way I wish it to, or that kind of thing. And also, one of the things that came up for me as I went through this was I, my mom, nursing for my mom, she was very, very unhappy when I was little. So, really all of her unhappiness I took on along with the breast milk. And it's not to blame her, because it's like any human being would have been unhappy in her circumstances. But I realized where it left me psychologically carrying kind of a wounding around my feminine. Now, as I journaled about this and I spoke to God a lot, because I think when we're ill, it's between us and God, it's something where we're out of alignment or we're learning. And it's not to blame the victim at all on this. I just mean it like in a scientific way, that it's, it's showing us that something's wrong with us, or unbalanced. So, as I kept working on it, I got more and more information. And the funny thing is that my operation was delayed as a result of COVID.
Oh, yeah.
And by the time I had the operation, the cancer was 50% smaller and had shrunk out of my nodes. So it was no longer in my immune system. So I didn't have to have chemotherapy or radiotherapy. So, I was inspired to think that maybe I could reach a kind of healing as a result of having experienced my son's miracle healing. And it was for me to learn to allow myself to have a healing. So, I still had the surgery, but it was very reassuring for me to see the empirical evidence of that I was on track. Okay, since this happened, my comfort with my own feminine nature and my acceptance of my feminine nature and the love power coming through is doubled, tripled, quadrupled. Like it freed me emotionally enormously. So I'm very grateful to the illness. And I had a really lovely surgeon, and he helped before I went in for the operation. He stood back and he gave me this look of utter compassion, which I don't think many people might get from their surgeons. And that assisted me too, So I was very lucky. But, that's an example of really what I'm talking about. The body will bring up trouble. And if we think that whatever pain or difficulty is in the process of healing, not to think, oh, something's wrong, like, oh, my knees hurt, but to think, oh, the complex is healing and the symptoms are just coming up. So one time in my 30s, actually I was about, 30s, early 40s, I woke up one morning and every joint in my body hurt. So it was really hard to move, and it was hard to move for 3 months. And I didn't go to the doctor because I felt that I didn't think it could be arthritis because it was every single joint. But, I recommend going to doctors because, I ran into trouble with my breath. So, but what happened was after it took 3 months, but all the pain left. And my body was suddenly about 35% more flexible. This flexibility came, and, I suspect that, in the joints, the pain and stiffness that came was, I was experiencing a physical form of what was going on with me emotionally, that there was a rigidity to me and a kind of stiffness and a repression of my chi, of my life energy. And it cleared through this experience. So it was terrible to go through, but it turned into a blessing. So this is how this transcendent body approach developed. And arms are reaching out and embracing, and hands are giving and receiving.
Mm.
um, Neck, again, perspective, we talked about that. How broad a perspective can we have? Our chest, love. Elbows are changed. When my husband left me, when this is part of where my training came from. I had a child still with leukemia, a newborn baby, and my husband leaves me.
Yeah.
And it's where I really had to turn to God. It's part of
Mm.
the really good thing. But my elbows hurt for three months. And I remember looking at Louise Hayes, who had it listed in her book, and it's changed. Elbows are changed, and my life was certainly changing. Shoulders, responsibility. Hips, personal power. Tummies, our stomach. It's how much can we stomach and digest, and body our own divinity. Sometimes when people are making a shift into strengthening their soul, they will feel nauseous or get acid reflux or even throw up. And that's happened to me before. But it's part of the changes that occur in the body as our vibration goes up, there are physiological changes. One of the things that happen with women who work with me is if they start off with difficulties at their time of the month, pains and everything, that will go. They will suddenly have very little trouble. And it's because I'm helping them embrace their female nature more. So they have no resistance to their feminine
Can you
way.
elaborate more on this resistance? What does it really mean? Because it seems like you're saying that emotional resistance can lead to physical resistance, resistance within your body.
Yeah, emotional resistance, like where we're trying to swim upstream, where we're not going with the flow, where we're not flowing with our true nature and with the God inside us, where we're resisting it for whatever reason. We think it's not allowed, or then that creates tension in the body, and it will also create illness finally, because the creator is going like, well, you're resisting me, like, so you're gonna have to have an experience of how you're resisting me, and I'll show it to you so you can allow it to heal. It's all very loving. It's all to help us. It just feels like we feel like, oh, I felt sorry for myself with the breast cancer. It's like, why me? I try so hard, I pray so hard.
Why do you think bad things happen to good people?
I think we're learning. We're souls in human form, so we come here to learn, and we forget that. We kind of like, we're like kids. It's like, I want chocolate for dinner. Okay, and it's like the parents gonna go, no, you can't have chocolate. It's sort of like, we come here to learn, and that's why we're here. It's sure we can have a good time here, but that's not, we can enjoy it here, but the point of it is for our awareness to grow and our faith in God to grow.
Yeah.
And life gets very gentle with us as we allow that. Right.
You've written
If
a
we're
lot
resisting.
about the transcendent way body approach. What is all that about?
Oh, just what I was saying about the body. Just what I was explaining.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That our
So,
resistance will show through the body. Mm-hmm.
so we need to pay attention to our aches and pains, like the bodily ailments, in order to understand the deep-rooted meaning that it holds.
Yeah, that's it. Because if supposing I have a problem with my hands, I could think, oh, okay, I don't know what it is, but there's the problem with giving and receiving. So I can give it over to God and then ask to be shown. And then, in a month, I might have a memory where something happened to me as a child, and I moved into distrust of life, or I felt that if I gave, that I would be exploited. So I stopped giving. This sort of thing.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
You've spoken about the feminine self and the masculine self, that it exists side by side within
Yeah.
every single human being's body. So a
Yes.
man will also have the feminine side and a woman will also have the masculine side.
Yes.
So tell us more about that. When does it become an obstacle in our journey? When does it become a problem? Is it the imbalance between the two, or?
Yeah. Well, really, in the perfectly functioning, like in a really awakened human being, like
Mm,
who's totally realized, their, their masculine and feminine are madly in love with each other. It's like mother and father and God are madly in love with each other.
yeah.
It's like, it's, it's the two polarities of humanity, and we need both. So, when if we're too lopsided either to the feminine or to the masculine,
Yeah.
then we become unhappy. It's, you know it, it, if there's too much feminine, what happens is nothing happens. There's not enough activity, and also we start losing individuality. It all becomes just a little bit amorphous. Whereas if there's too much masculinity, then things can get um, hard, like a move towards brutality without the softening of the feminine. And also with the masculine, things can become very hierarchical without more the cooperation of the feminine. So, you know, it's to keep both polarities balanced. So that the full spectrum of our humanity can express ourselves.
And how do we
You know,
create that balance?
how do we create this? I feel women have to love themselves.
And that comes through self-care, self-compassion, forgiveness, all of that, right?
Yeah, and to side with their true female natures. Like I was on a plane coming back from Germany, where I share this work. And on the
Mm,
plane, this little child cried, and people were getting more and more upset.
yeah.
And so I walked over to the mom finally and said, "Well, maybe can I hold the baby for a while and give you a rest?" But it was, COVID, we were wearing masks, and she didn't feel safe enough. But luckily, I touched the baby's hand and he stopped crying and he didn't
Wow.
cry again. Yeah, it was so, I was so happy. Um, but the thing was, afterwards, somebody came up to me and told me that I'd restored her faith in the human race. And
Wow. That's
I'm like,
powerful.
I just went over and offered a mom a little bit of help, like it didn't deserve a medal. It's just a very human thing to do. And
Mm,
around me, when I was there speaking to the mom, I could feel a great kind of turmoil around the people nearby with how, antsy they were getting, how irritated, and how grateful they were that somebody had come over. But the thing is that, you know, it could have, maybe someone could have gotten up and just as they passed the mom smiled at her, or made a gentle comment about how hard parenthood could be, or bring out a pair of keys and jiggle them in front of the child. It's like it alarmed me that there seemed to be this big kind of wall against just sharing our humanity and helping one another out in this just gentle, easy way. Do you see? So that's where I think we're losing the feminine a bit. It's because any woman, especially a woman who's had children, knows
mm,
what that would feel like to have a baby that's just screaming in a
mm.
plane, and being and to Mother Nature, and YouTube channel. That's the thing I'm most excited about right now.
Yeah.
It's called Wisdom and the Fact in Our
Yeah.
Human Lives.
Yeah.
And I have the books on Amazon. And I do sessions all around the world with people who
Yeah.
want a session.
And I believe people from different faith groups, different walks of life, ethnicities can approach you and find healing, right?
In our
Yeah.
human lives.
Yeah.
And I have the books on Amazon in our
Yeah.
human lives.
Yeah. Feedback, please contact our Hidayat TV's Facebook or YouTube page. You can also call in the studio and leave your contact details or email us, and we will get back to you. We'll see you again next Saturday with another guest and another topic related to spirituality, psychological well being, and mental health. Till then, look after yourselves and be kind to yourself and one another. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.